Welcome back! I gave myself a bit of a head start again, and I just found out the hard way that completely whited out contacts, you literally can't see anything. Like these I can see a little bit, but like the other ones that I just tried from Robbie, I could not see anything. I could see my lights, but I couldn't see anything in front of me. I couldn't like see the mirror in front of me. Like people who wear completely whited out, not the mesh ones, but this completely white contacts and can still do their makeup are witches. I don't mean to alarm anyone, but they're among us. Alright, as always, I will have all of the stuff that I'm using listed down below, except for these contacts, because I don't support the company, but I'm going to use the contacts because I paid for them. Okay? So, with that said, let's get spooky. Robin was an army brat. She didn't make friends very easily because she was always moving around town to town, and finally her parents stayed in one school long enough that she actually kind of made friends. And all of her friends talked non-stop about the summer camp that they always go to. So Robin begged her parents and begged her parents. She really, really wanted to go to summer camp with all of her friends. She'd never, had that opportunity. And, she was a good kid. She was, a responsible kid. So even though they kind of had some reservations about sending her off on her own for that long, they knew, she could handle it. So they looked into the camp and they found out, it had been running for decades and, it was a well-established place. So they decided to let her go. So Robin and all of her friends were so excited. They could not wait to get to camp. They had all these plans for stuff that they were going to do, and they couldn't wait to show Robin around because she'd never seen any of it, so it was going to be all new to her. And they were just all really, really excited about it. So they get to camp, and, it was cool. But their counselor was kind of rude and mean and just killing the vibe, So one of their favorite pastimes kind of became to make fun of her and just complain about her, and they called her the Wicked Witch behind her back. Well, one day, the counselor had been particularly just hateful. So they were really abusing her that night after lights out. Giggling, of course, girls. And one of them piped up with, well, she's not the worst counselor that this camp has ever had. To which everyone groaned. And of course, Robin was like, wait, what? What's going on? So then the girls kind of got a little excited because they're like, oh yeah, she doesn't know. So they began telling Robin the story about the counselor who back in the 80s went a little mad. The legend has it that something had been off about her that entire summer, and no one could really figure out what it was, but it hadn't really concerned anyone, But she definitely wasn't herself. And if people had known what was coming, they might have paid a little bit more attention, but sadly they didn't. She just kind of snapped one night. And she called one of her girls out of the bunk and said, there's been some sort of emergency. Your family's on the phone for you. You're going to have to go to the main office. Middle of the night. And nobody thought anything of it, So she takes the girl out. And the next morning, the girl's stuff was gone, and her bunk was all made up, and, you know, the blanket was all folded down, and all of that, like she'd never been there. So, of course, you know, the other girls were like, hey, you know, what happened? And the counselor said, oh, she had to go home. There was a family emergency. Nobody thought anything of it, you know, emergencies happen, of course. Not that unusual, so things went on like normal. Well, a few days later, she goes into the bunk again, middle of the night, wakes one of the girls up and says, you have to come to me at the main office. There's some kind of family emergency. So once again, girl left, middle of the night, and never returned. When the girls woke up the next morning, her stuff was gone, her bunk was made up. Well, again, family emergencies happen, so nobody really thought anything of it. They're just like, okay, you know, kind of odd that two of us had some kind of family emergency that we had to go home, but it happens, you know? Well, things kind of kept going on like that. Every couple of days, she'd come in, middle of the night, wake the girls up, and one of them had some sort of family emergency. They had to leave. And everyone thought that was a little odd that so many of them were having these family emergencies, you know? So one night, she came and was going to take one of the girls, because again, there was a emergency. And the other girls, who by this point were waking up when this stuff was happening, but they were just kind of laying there going, oh no, you know, someone else had an emergency. But they were starting to get a little bit suspicious. So they decided to follow the counselor. The counselor was dragging these girls out of their bunks, knocking them out with her flashlight, and then dragging them off to the backwoods. Now, the girls didn't know what was going on back there, so of course they had to follow. And what they saw was a horrible sight. There was this old pond, kind of off on like one of their older trails in the woods, and they saw bodies floating in the pond, and the counselor was dragging this poor girl to the pond. Well, it didn't take a brain surgeon to tell them what was happening here. The counselor was knocking these girls out and then drowning them in the pond. So they had to save their friend, right? So they tried to attack her. Well, she still had the flashlight, so she dropped the girl that was still unconscious, started swinging. Well, a few of them were smart, and they acted like she had hit them in the head, but they put their arm up to block it, and then fell down like they were unconscious. So the girls that had fallen down waited until she was trying to drag two of them at once, and then they sprung into action and they drug her into the water, and they all tried to gang up on her to drown her in the pond. At this point, I mean, it was self-defense, right? There's nothing anyone could say or do about it. Well, she was strong, and she fought them hard, and there was a lot of kicking and clawing that went on. But eventually, they managed to drown her. And the girls ran back to the path, found their way back to the camp, and alerted anyone that could come. Well, it was a whole big fiasco. The cops had to come. The camp was shut down for a full year. After that, they had to have a full psych evaluation for anyone that wanted to work there. And it kind of gave the camp a bad name for a while. But eventually, it bounced back, and it was the camp that they all knew and loved now. But the legend has it, anyone who goes to that pond in the middle of the night will get drowned by the ghost of the counselor. And with that, they heard a loud bang on the door, and it was their counselor yelling at them for talking after lights out. So the next day, Robin really kind of was shook by that story. I mean, she didn't realize that she was coming to a place where something so horrific had happened. And she was a little scared, you know? Wouldn't you be? But she didn't want to act scared, of course, because then her friends would think she was a wimp. And I mean, she's an army brat, you know? Like, they're strong. She had to be like, oh, wow, yeah, scary story. You guys really got me last night. But the girl that was telling the story was like, it's not a story. People do drown in that pond. They have it roped off. You can't get to it now. They don't even allow people to go on that path now because it leads to the pond. Well, she didn't believe that. She's like, oh, come on. Like, I get it. Okay, it was a scary story. You got me good, but I'm not believing this. But she said, no, it's true. Like, some of the other counselors would go up there and skinny dip. I mean, you know, full, 17, 18-year-old people, they all drowned. Well, defined by nature. She's like, okay, guys, you're not gonna scare me with this. This is a bunch of nonsense. Okay, I don't believe in ghosts. Which, of course, led to the inevitable, oh yeah? Prove it. Let's go to the pond. So they made plans to go find the pond. So they had a plan. They had a little backpack filled with snacks and flashlights, of course. And that night, they snuck out of the bunk and they found the path to the woods. They started seeing police tape, and they thought, well, we have to be getting close, because what else would be back here that they'd have barricaded off? And soon they found this other path, and they thought, okay, this has to be the path to the pond. And then before they knew it, there was the pond. And it seemed totally innocent. The girls thought, okay, yeah, ooh, big, scary, haunted pond, you know. Couldn't believe they let so many people talk them into believing that this pond was haunted by a ghost that used to drown people. Like, there's no way. And they started laughing about how scared they had been and breaking out their snacks. Just having a good old time, you know. Started chatting and talking about boys and what they had planned for the next school year. And then suddenly they heard a splash. And then someone was like, I bet it was a turtle or something, guys. Like, we're being stupid. We're out here in the middle of the night. And our imaginations are just running away with us. That's what it is. So the girls went back to laughing and gossiping and all of that. Again. Thinking they were just being silly and the stories were getting the best of them. When they heard a bigger splash. And what sounded like someone swimming or something. They looked out on the pond. And the water was perfectly still. No ripples, nothing. Well, the girls were feeling a little less brave now. And thought, you know what, maybe we should just pack up our little picnic here and get back to the bunkhouse. Like, we found the pond. It's just a pond. But who knows what else is out here. There's all kinds of wildlife, you know. We should get back to safety. That was their thought. But unfortunately for them, they weren't alone. As they were packing up their stuff, they looked back out to the pond, and a head slowly started emerging out of the water. But again, the water was perfectly still, like nothing was happening. But they could see what was clearly a woman's face, and she had these deep scratches down her face like she'd been fighting off someone. But her skin was ghostly white, but she looked like a corpse that had been drowned. Well, the girls started panicking, of course. I mean, obviously, the rumors were true. Here she was, the ghost of the counselor. But they weren't in the water, so they're safe, right? She just drowns people that are swimming in the pond. They didn't get in the pond. Well, slowly, the ghost started coming towards them. And the girls started panicking, and they started trying to run away. But they heard one of the girls screaming. They turned back to see the last one in the line being grabbed by the ghost, who was suddenly on the pond bank and being dragged back to the water. Well, they couldn't let their friend drown, right? So they had to turn back. So turn back they did. And they tried. But for some reason, every time they turned around, the ghost was in a different spot, trying to drown another girl. They kept fighting her and kept fighting her, but she was just too strong. The next morning, the bunk counselor woke up and realized 4 of her girls were missing. She immediately rounded on all the other girls in the bunk. Where are they? What do you guys know? And eventually one of them ratted out that they'd planned to go to the pond. You know, the haunted pond. Well, the counselor rounded up a bunch of the other adults, and they went out to the pond and checked, and sure enough, they found 4 floating bodies. They ruled it as an accidental drowning. There was all kinds of weeds underneath the surface of that pond, and it's really easy for even experienced swimmers to get tangled up in them, which is why they had it roped off. None of the other stories are true, of course. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I think this look is really cool, and I wet the hair for dramatic effect, because, you know, I'm dramatic. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you next week. Love you, boy. Don't go skinny dipping in any strange ponds.